So on Sunday night in prime time, we had what was supposed to be a highly anticipated matchup. Top 10, the only ranked versus ranked matchup in opening weekend. Florida State Seminoles, LSU essentially was a home game for Florida State. I think they're in Orlando. So basically a home game. But LSU and Florida State, probably two of the most hyped teams coming into the season. Some of the higher ranked teams that didn't make it into the playoffs last year. And in the first half, this was a good game, 17-14 at the half. Both teams making some good plays, both teams making mistakes. And then in the second half, it was a complete domination. Brian Kelly probably should have kept his mouth shut up with what he said. Too bad. Florida State wins 45-24. And LSU is going to have a rough time making the playoffs if they don't win out.
Yeah, this was a rough one. It starts off pretty good, as Terrence has said. You get 17-14 by halftime. LSU leading it well. So just a good way to go. Good time to kind of boost yourself up. You're feeling good, right? It's five versus 8. It's going to be close. That's a good feeling. Well, LSU would stay at 17 until like the very last drive of the game, essentially. It was a showboat touchdown towards the end for sure, something to feel somewhat excited about, but there was no coming back by that point. And Brian Kelly, as you also just noted, they did not, in fact, go to Florida State and beat the heck out of them, as he said they would. That did not work out for LSU too well. So, looking at it on paper for just a moment, Jordan Travis has a pretty good game. Florida State quarterback, 23 for 31, 342 yards, 4 touchdowns to 1 interception. It's a pretty good ratio. And he racks up about 40 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground as well. So a pretty good game for Jordan Travis. 5 touchdowns for him, kind of rolling over LSU. Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson both exceeded 100 receiving yards. So another game this week where we had some pretty good receiving action going on. And then Coleman picked up 3 touchdowns. Jaheim Bell got the other one, but not a whole lot of yards for him. Thomas was able to recover an Anderson fumble, and then Renardo Green picked off Jaden Daniels. LSU, Jaden Daniels doesn't look too much different from Jordan Travis on paper, except for one key thing. Jaden Daniels goes 22 for 37, 347 yards, so 1 less completion, 5 more yards. 1-for-1 touchdown interception ratio. He also led his team in rushing yards with 64, but the glaring difference there is Travis's 4 touchdowns and 1 on the ground compared to Jaden's 1 touchdown, and then the 1 pick also offsets. So Noah Kane and Trey Bradford both played well, scored rushing touchdowns. Brian Thomas Jr. was great for LSU receiving wise with 142 yards and a touchdown. And the LSU receiving core, at least when you look at it on paper and don't think about like the effect on the game, looks good, right? There's not a whole lot to be mad about. They all get, or a lot of them get like around 40 yards and up, 37, 39, 55, 67, and then a big jump to 142. Brian Thomas Jr. having that 75-yard touchdown at the end of the game that didn't mean much, but did make his stats look really pretty. And then Deuce Chestnut picked off Jordan Travis. But the big thing here for LSU, and I'll let Terrence get into this too, he was just talking about it before we started the segment, that a lot of LSU's yardage in this game or stats are just kind of empty, right? They put up 142 yards and a touchdown for Brian Thomas Jr., the receiver. And really, I mean, the final score is 24-45, but it's essentially a 17-45 game the whole way through, as Florida State rolls through, racks up 45 points, and LSU just kind of rolls around and gives the ball back over and over again in various ways. So a lot of these yards come early for LSU, and then they die, and then they kind of boost up towards the end. So good stats, but this is one of the things we've talked about on the podcast before, is that sometimes when you look at it on paper, it just won't really make a lot of sense, and this is one of the ones where you got to LSU stats look pretty, but you got to look back and think about how the game was actually played, and a lot of it is pretty empty. Now this one, to kind of counteract what I just said as well, looking at Jaden Daniels' stats to Jordan Travis, sure, on paper that one it is easy, 4 touchdowns, 1 touchdown, you can see it pretty clearly, but just a lot of the receiving core, a lot of the yardage, and this one is kind of fluffed up, so.
Yeah, I mean, you can go to the first drive. I mean, the first drive didn't kill him, obviously. I mean, this was only a 7-7 game 2 drives later. So the first drive didn't kill him, but you can just kind of go back to it. First play of the game, pass to Trey Bradford, 55 yards, all the way down to Florida State's 20. And then again, another pass, 15 yards to Florida State's 5. And then they have 6 plays to get a touchdown from the 5. Can't do it. Get a first and goal, then a second and goal. There's a penalty, which there are multiple penalties on Florida State for unnecessary roughness, late hits, that kind of thing. Some of them are okay. Other ones are like a little ridiculous. I think one did get picked up that they didn't call, but did have a penalty there. Reset downs. They set up on 4th and goal, and then they called a timeout because they didn't like what was going on there. And they still come back anyway, go for it anyway. From the one, still fourth opportunity, can't get it. So they went 60 yards on that drive, all the way down to the 1, get nothing. That was basically a waste. Great opportunity for Florida State, obviously, as they scored a touchdown on the next drive. And then just a few drives later, LSU has another long drive, 70 yards. And then on 4th down at Florida State's 13, Jaden Daniels gets sacked. So again, that's 2 drives of 60 or more yards where you come away with 0 points. I mean, you can't really expect to win like that. They could have had 2 touchdowns at least there. And if they only got field goals, they still would have been ahead. So, and then immediately after that, I don't want to just sound like I'm harping on LSU's mistakes here, but when you lose by over 20 points, you did make a lot of mistakes. They were literally just talking about issues with punt returns in the previous LSU Florida State game last year. And then did they have an issue on the punt return? Most of the punt was recovered by Thomas of Florida State. Now, this one didn't hurt them because immediately after that, Jordan Travis did throw his interception. But again, all these miscues just in the first few drives. And again, all these yards really not amounting to much of anything. Because whenever they were showing the graphics throughout the game, really at halftime, it seemed like LSU should have, just based off of that, should have been up a lot more. But they just didn't really get much going. Um, and they did have that field goal at the end of the half. But again, that was a 70-yard drive. And they did go pretty fast in just a minute. But again, having such a long drive, only being able to get a field goal out of that, that's 3 drives, 60 yards or more, only coming away with 3 points on each of those drives. I mean, that's just not going to get it done. And then pretty much after that, man, Florida State, like you said, touchdown, 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 touchdown. They just completely took over.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a tale of exactly what Terrence just described, right? Just a lot of stuff with LSU. It just doesn't go anywhere. They get a really big boost out of somewhere, and then it kind of trails off a little bit. As I said, when I listed off all the receiving numbers, I had a 55 in there. Terrence mentioned that there was a 55-yard pass to Trey Bradford. That was his 55 yards. That's what he got. That was his only reception. And so it's just kind of a lot of stuff like that where like there's good things happening. They're not finishing, and then they make a few mistakes on offense, and then defensively in the second half a lot goes wrong. And yeah, I mean it's field goal for Florida State to make it 17-17. LSU will punt. Not time to panic yet, right? You're tied. Florida State scores a 17-24. Okay, not time to panic. You can tie it up again. Then they throw a pick, and then there's a touchdown, and then they punt, and then there's a touchdown, and then they turn it over on downs, touchdown, and then LSU throws that 75-yard touchdown. And it's like the Chris Ball thing. He makes a big 3 to cut the lead to 32. And that's it. I mean, there's nothing else for Florida State to do but let the game end and draw it out. So this one, as we talked about in our other video with Colorado and TCU this week, there wasn't a lot to be upset with TCU about. This one, I think LSU has a lot to look at and go, okay, we really messed up here. We can't finish the drives here. We're a lot too many mistakes when happen on both sides of the ball, and there's a lot for them to fix, and it's going to be rough for them to make the playoffs after this. But Florida State has looked really well, and as a Clemson fan, I'm excited to have a good game against them, or a game that should be good between us this season. But I do also, it's a little worrying when they put on an offensive display like that. But I think this is a fun outlook for both teams. You have LSU a lot to fight for, and it'll be interesting to see Florida State being a top tier team this season. How long they can hold on to that?
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously, both of us growing up here in South Carolina, Florida State, Clemson, those were games to look forward to, 6, 7 years ago. But pretty much since Florida State trailed off as Clemson ascended. That hadn't been the case, but as of now, they're 8 and 9 respectively. Depending on how things shake up, obviously LSU is going to drop after this one, so they'll probably move up a few spots there. But yeah, that should be a pretty big matchup in a few weeks. And like I said, it's not like the season is over for LSU, but now we know Alabama and Georgia. Obviously, LSU is in the same division as Alabama, so they'll have to deal with that. Georgia in the East. So you have those two powerhouses in the SEC. You're gonna have to worry about them. Obviously, we know two SEC teams. If there's gonna be two teams from a conference to make it, it'll probably be SEC. That's just kind of how it's been. But LSU now is probably gonna have to run the table, assuming Alabama and Georgia don't screw up anywhere. Because if they had only lost, let's say, by 3, I think it wouldn't have been as much of an issue. But getting beat 21 points by a team that's kind of in a similar state you are, as far as ranking and everything and expectations, that's kind of an issue. And I guess that's also the issue with taking these early matchups, in week 1 against ranked teams. I mean, every year we get a couple teams that do it, but for the most part, these top tier ranked teams, they play the North Alabamas, the South Texas or whatever, these first few weeks before conference play starts. And that's the risk that you take. Obviously, you don't have a preseason college football. So that is the risk that you take going up against a top tier team like this in the first week. It can make you or break you if you have a really good game, like Florida State did, or if you have a game like LSU. You know, when Ohio State lost to Oregon a few years ago, pretty early on, didn't kill them, but they didn't lose by 20 something points. This one might hurt LSU if they don't run the table. Um, they do have to play Alabama later in the season, but that's pretty much the only game that's going up against a really, really good team. Obviously, you do have A&M and Ole Miss, but for the most part, that is the marquee game for them. So they still have a chance. And obviously, Florida State definitely has a chance, but Florida State, of course, looking way better after this one.
Yeah, I think ultimately the difficulty for LSU comes from the confidence, right? They've got a lot more to get through than, say, Florida State, if Florida State would have dropped this game. So I think that's going to be interesting. I enjoyed, as a Clemson fan, losing to LSU a few years ago in the national championship. I could probably say that I enjoyed this outcome, and I look forward to seeing these two teams progress forward this season.